back home, and I thought we had been gone 53 or 54 days, and for some reason, the Lord was kind of asking me about that this morning, so I just got my phone out and looked at the calendar and actually counted the days, and we were gone exactly 55 days. Now, I came home a couple times in that time, like for one night, but so I've been with you twice since then, but I was thinking 55, 5 is a number of grace. So, Lord, I'm expecting double grace for those 55 days. And I just want to tell you that we're just so happy to be home. We're just so thrilled. I really feel like Earl is better now that we're home, and he is. I told him Wednesday night some funny things that he had been saying. He doesn't have a filter now. And the real Earl has come out, and you know what? The real Earl is really a sweet person. He didn't want any of you to know that. So he always kept kind of the gruff Earl on the surface, but he's a very sweet person, and he will say the most hilarious things. So I'll just share one thing with you that happened. I don't remember what morning it was. Jessica was with us, so I'm so thankful for our children. They've been so faithful. Jill and Caleb are here now, but Jessica was having the quiet time with the Lord with Earl and I that morning, and I think it's maybe Thursday morning, and I read Psalms 27 like I've been doing, and we prayed, and we were all praying and everything, and Earl said, you know, I watched the people in the hospital that were taking care of me, and he said, the nurses and the doctors and the techs and different ones, and he said, I noticed some of them were really good at connecting with you, and some of them weren't. They gave you good care, and they would talk to you, but they didn't connect with you. And he said, I realized I'm not very good at that either. I'm going to work on that. He said, I can talk to anybody. But he said, I have a hard time connecting sometimes. And he said, I need to work on that. And I said, sometimes, Earl, you're better at connecting with strangers than you are your own family or people that you're really close to. And he said, I know. He said, I'm going to work on that. He said, I know. I said, sometimes it feels like you're cold to the girls and I. And he said, I know, and I'm sorry for that. He said, I just don't know what to say sometimes. He said, it's not that I'm not interested or not that I don't want to. I just don't always know what to say. And then later I think about what I should have said or should have done. And I said, it's okay. We love you anyway. And he said, well, you know, you're better at that. You're a woman. Women are better at doing that kind of thing. He said, but I'm going to work on it. He said, you know what you could do? You could start a fewer words club, and you could deposit those words in a bank account, and then people like me could draw them out. But then this was the kicker. He said, but there'd have to be a whole lot more of us. I said, I think that was a backhand slam. Pretty sure it was. But he has said funny things nearly every day. Julie said I should start writing them down. I'm trying to remember all of them, but it was a funny day. And Jessica had been so, you know, sitting there feeling so warm and fuzzy, having this, you know, spiritual time with her mom and dad. And then he said that, and we both just, you know, were busted out laughing because it was really funny. God has been using Abraham to talk to me. And I want to start out with the verse I've probably used more than any other verse since I've been speaking to this church family and since God's been teaching me this. Romans 12:2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And that is a life verse for me, because when I got hold of that, when I realized the world did not have the answers for me to have a good, pleasing, and perfect life, that my life was not like that, and that I wanted it to be good, pleasing, and perfect to God and to myself, and I started asking God, how is that? How does that happen? And he started saying, your mind's got to be transformed. Cindy, you think like the world. If you think like the world, you'll start acting like the world, and you will feel like the world about things. And if you want to change, you can't do it by sheer force and determination of your own. You can do some, because we're powerful beings. But if you really want to have the will of God in your life, if you really want to have that good, pleasing, and perfect will of God, for you to accomplish and be what God has created you to be, You're going to have your mind transformed. And we've been working on that together, all of us here at Salt of the Earth for the last 6 years. Searching the Word. God, how do we do that? What does your Word say that we need to do? And we know religion doesn't do it. Religion's not done a good job. Religion wants you to change behavior. Religion has lots of do's and don'ts. And you can, by a lot of self-discipline, make yourself not do some of those things that you know don't give you the consequences you want in your life. But if you want true change, it's got to change here. And I've been learning more of that in the last 60 days. God, what am I still holding on to? What traditions of man, what traditions of religion, what belief systems and thoughts do I have that are hindering me from fully living as you created me to be? You created me. You know what you created me for. Am I fully fulfilling that? Because that's the only way I'm going to find my true happiness, my true source of joy, my true fulfillment. And it's the same for each one of us. He created us for a purpose. And Abraham was a man who understood that. You know, if you go back and read the book of Genesis, you'll read about people in the book of Genesis, but it's only Abraham who has a relationship with God. He's the first one. So like Adam was in the garden, yes, he had a relationship. But after the fall, you have Noah. And Noah was obedient, and he did exactly what God told him to. But the Bible does not record conversations that God had with Noah. You can be obedient. You can be surrendered. But are you a friend of God? Are you one who has a relationship? Can you negotiate with God? Can you talk to God? Can you say, God, I don't understand this. I don't like this. You're going to have to help me. You're going to have to explain this to me. Abraham was like that. And I'm going to start with Genesis 12, 1 through 4. You're all familiar with this scripture. Now the Lord said to Abram, because he hadn't changed his name yet, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. And that kind of is the beginning of the relationship. So this where God tells him to get out of his country, get out of what's familiar, get out of what you know, get out of your traditions, get out of your opinions, get out of your thought processes, get out of the things you trust in and lean on, and go to somewhere I'm going to show you, and I'm not going to tell you what that is. You're going to have to so become relational with me, to so have a friendship with me, to so be in tune with what I'm saying and walk with me every day, or you won't even know where to go. And that Hebrew word for that, get out, and there are lots of different versions of that. If you read different versions of the Bible, literally it means go for yourself. And it's the word lek leka, the Hebrew word lek leka. Go for yourself. Go for yourself. Now that's weird. Go for yourself. What does that mean? What if we don't even know what our self is? What if God says, get out of this thing you're in, this thought process you're in, this mindset that you have, and go be yourself that I created you to be? Get out of yourself and go be yourself. Quit being what the world has said you are. Maybe the world says you're a liar. Maybe the world says you're a loser. Maybe the world says you're wonderful. But what does God say you are? What did he create you to be? And he says, lek leka, go be yourself. Go get out of this, what you think is yourself, and go be your true self. And this is the covenant, he says. He says, I will make you a great nation. Now that's an amazing promise. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Haran was the country of his father and his father's fathers. And according to Hebraic tradition, Abraham's father was an idol maker. He made idols. People worshiped stone and wood, metal idols that Abraham's father, or Abram at the time, was his father made. And Abram had to leave that. He had to leave those things that his father valued, those things that his forefathers had valued that were worthless, that could not bring him fulfillment, that could not show him who he really was. He was worshiping something that was not God. And God says, get out of that. Get out of what you know, and I'm going to show you who you really are. And I'm going to show you what I have for you, because it's not just about you. You know, if I could go back and talk to the old Cindy, this young Cindy, how about that? This is the old Cindy. If I could go talk to the young Cindy, I would tell her some of the ways you thought and felt and acted and said and did, you thought didn't affect anyone but you. But you affected all the people around you, but you especially affected the generation after you and the generations to come. None of us have a life that's just about us. Because, see, Abram found that out. Abram was 75 years old when he left his father's country to go where God was going to send him, which, of course, was the land of Canaan, the land of Israel. And he was going to be the father of many nations, and he didn't have one child yet, not one. And at 75, he didn't really have much hope of having a child. His wife was barren. She was older, too, like him. I think in Scripture she's like 10 years younger than he is. And they did not end up having children until Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90. That's pretty old to have kids. But Abraham, for 25 years, followed God to find his good, pleasing, and perfect will. That's a long time to wait for a promise. And today, the promise of many nations coming from Abraham is still being fulfilled. He didn't get to see it all, but it is still a promise that God's working in. That because God is the God of Revelation 1:8, when he says this, these are red letter words, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the A and the Z, the Aleph and the Tav. I'm the Alpha and Omega. I'm the beginning and the end, says the Lord, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. He's the God who I said before my prayer, simultaneously, all at the same time, exists in the past, present, and future. So everything that came before that caused pain and hurt and heartache and death and destruction in our bloodlines, in our lineage, God was there. He saw it. And he gave all of those who came before us the opportunity to know him. All men, the Bible says, know there is a creator. And he is also, because he's not bound by time and space, the God who exists right now. And at the same time, he already exists in our future. And he wants us to become more like him, where we're not looking at just present. And I'm going to tell you, I've struggled with that lately. I've struggled with not getting stuck in present. Because present hasn't been so pleasant every day. And there are days that I've wanted to give up hope. And there are days when I've been discouraged, just like you. You have too. And we have to keep holding on that God is the God who is, but he also is the God to come. So what is coming to us, time is coming to us, but God's already there. And the plan he has for me is good. The plan he has for my family is good. So when it doesn't feel good, I can hold on to there is a God who has good for me. And it can help us not be double-minded. We all have to learn this. God, you've been good before. Why do I doubt you're going to be good in the future? We just all witnessed our country going through a lot of turmoil with the elections. And people predicting and broadcasting doom and gloom, whichever side of the fence you were on. Did you hear very many people saying, I think the greatest days are ahead. I think God wants to bless and prosper this nation and all the people in it and the nations of the earth, not just America. You don't hear a lot of that. But that's the plan of God. His good, pleasing, and perfect will is for his people. You know, Abraham taught us that because he did have a son. He waited a long time, but he did have a son. And out of that son came all of the nations who will believe as Abraham. Listen to this from Romans 4:16 through 17. Therefore, it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise might be sure to all the seed, not only to those who are of the law, speaking of the Jewish people, all the people of the old covenant. The promise of Abraham's not just for them, but also to those who are the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. The man who said, God, what's your plan? And you don't have to tell me what it is 5 years from now. I'll walk today. What's your plan today? I will follow that plan today as we are walking this journey together where I'm going to a land I do not know. I'm trusting you know because you're already there. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations in the presence of him whom he believed. God, and this is a description of God, who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. That's who God is. He can give life to the dead and call things that don't even exist yet. He can call them into being. Light be, and there was light. Jesus dying on a cross, and there was resurrection. God calls into being those things that do not exist yet as though they are. Abraham's body was too old to father children. Sarah's body was barren and too old to bear a child, and they had a baby. God can call those things that are not as though they were, dead things. And we know that this elect like a go and be yourself. Go and get out of who you are now and go be who I created you to be. Jesus showed us that too in Matthew 14. I'm going to read 22 through 33 out of the Passion. As soon as the people were fed, Jesus told his disciples to get into their boat and go to the other side of the lake, while he stayed behind to dismiss the people. And what he's talking about is the 5,000 that he had just fed loaves and fishes to, and the disciples had just distributed that food. They had just performed a miracle with Jesus. They had just been walking with Jesus in this journey, going and being who Jesus called them to be. And Jesus is dismissing the people, and he puts the disciples in the boat, and he says, go to the other side of the lake. Now remember, Jesus is God. And God calls those things that are not yet as though they were already. And Jesus is saying, you're going to go from here to there in this boat. And after the crowds dispersed, Jesus went up into the hills to pray. And as night fell, he was there praying alone with God. But the disciples, who were now in the middle of the lake, ran into trouble. For their boat was tossed about by the high winds and heavy seas. At about 4 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to them walking on the waves. And when the disciples saw him walking on top of the water, they were terrified and screamed, a ghost. Then Jesus said, be brave and don't be afraid. I am here. And Peter shouted out, Lord, if it's really you, then have me join you on the water. Come and join me, Jesus replied. So Peter stepped out into the water and began to walk toward Jesus. But when he realized how high the waves were, he became frightened and started to sink. Save me, Lord, he cried out. And Jesus immediately stretched out his hand and lifted him up and said, what little faith you have. Why would you let doubt win? And nobody wants to be the loser, right? Why would you let doubt win? That very moment they both stepped into the boat, the raging wind ceased. Then all the disciples crouched down before him and worshiped Jesus. They said in adoration, you are truly the Son of God. I've been like this the last week. Last Friday morning, Earl was not doing well that morning. His oxygen was low. They had to put him back on oxygen. He was very confused. The hospitalist came in early, about 6:30, 7 o'clock, and he couldn't get Earl to really rouse up, wake up. And he hadn't been that way. And we were still in the med surg room because we'd been in ICU the week before, he had to have another liver embolization. In fact, it was another he was saved from death kind of thing. His liver started bleeding into his abdomen. That was on a Wednesday. They took him to ICU immediately. They went in and did this block these veins in his liver called liver embolization, then a surgery. And then we were in ICU about 3 days, and then they sent us to a med surg floor for a week, and then we were supposed to go from there to rehab. So this is last Friday, a week ago this last Friday. And the hospitalist comes in, like I said, and he said, I'm concerned about maybe he has another brain bleed. We're going to take him to the radiology for a CT scan on his head. And so I'm confident. I'm not worried. I'm like, I don't think that's it. I think he's just confused this morning. I think his oxygen was low. He's been in bed a lot. We were breathing it up more and all that in rehab, so he's just the result of a week of just laying in bed. And so while he was gone, a lady comes in the room in one of those white coats, and I'm thinking, I haven't seen her before, and so I walk over to her and introduce myself, and she has Dr., I can't tell you her name, and it says oncology under her name. And I knew. He had had a biopsy between the embolization and this morning of his liver. They wanted just to be sure because they told us he didn't have any kind of cancer. And she said, Earl's biopsy came back. It's called small cell neuroendocrine carcinoma. There's no cure. It's very aggressive. The only thing we possibly could do is give him some chemo to prolong his life for a little while, but he's too medically fragile to do that, so he can't even do that. This is the exact same kind of cancer that Steve Jobs had, that he died from. Steve Jobs had all the money to go all over the world, try every treatment. He even had a liver transplant. And it finally was in his pancreas, and I think that's what finally ended his life. And you know what? I listened to every word she said. My heart sunk. I have been through all these times when doctors have come in and said, this is it. Earl's not going to make it. Keep him comfortable. It won't take very long. And I fought against every time, but not this time. Why do you think that is? I mean, do you think it is because I was tired of fighting? Maybe. I don't think that was it. I think it was more when a doctor tells you somebody really famous who has a lot of money died from this, and there's no hope, and it has that C word attached to it, you start thinking like the world. Your mind goes, oh no, this is it. God has rescued him before so many times, but maybe this is not the time he's going to get rescued. So almost immediately after she tells me all this, and she's very kind, and she's very sorry, they wheel Earl back in. They take him out on his bed. They bring him back in. She looks at me, and she goes, are you going to tell him? And I said, no, ma'am, you're going to tell him. And she got that look of like, oh, please don't make me tell him. It was hard enough telling you. I don't want to tell him. And I thought, I'm not telling him. I don't want to confess this for one thing, but I was afraid. I was afraid. So they get him set back up in the bed and everything, and she tells him. I just stand to the side. And then she leaves, and I sit down beside him. I said, what do you want to do? He said, I just want to go home. He was as calm as a cucumber. I said, okay, that's what I want to do too. Let's just go home. So we started that process. We came home. All this week, we've been home. It's been wonderful. Our daughters and son-in-laws have been with us. Our grandkids came. Friends and family have been there. It's been wonderful to be home and see people we love. But in the back of our minds, we're thinking we're preparing for the last days, and they're going to be soon. And I don't know that I ever even confessed that openly to myself, but Jessica, before she left Friday, she said, Mom, I feel like we're being really double-minded. We're praying over Dad. We're declaring the word over Dad. We're telling people that we have great hope, that we don't know what his last day will be. But then when we're as a family, we're letting him tell us what he wants for his funeral, what he wants done, how he wants finances. What do you think, Mom? Don't you think that's a little confusing? I'm like, it is. You're right. You're right. Why am I letting doubt win? Why did, when the neurosurgeons said, there's no way he can survive this, and Jill and I are in the ICU with him, and we asked the nurse, what can we expect? And no one will tell us. And she sends a PA in, and he says, and I told you this one of the other times, he comes in and explains to us what happened. But the right fourth of his brain was filled with blood the second time after he had the brain bleed, his second brain bleed, and second surgery. And Jill, and he tells him, this is what happens when you have that kind of brain bleed. You have a stroke. It's all technical. And then Jill says, so what can we expect? And he says, I don't know. And Jill's like, why? And he said, because I've never dealt with someone who's had that. People who have this kind of brain bleed have a 100% mortality rate. No one I've ever dealt with has made it with that kind of brain bleed. And we were like, oh, okay. Do you know he's talking? He could remember things. He's very lucid. If you want to come see him, he'll talk to you. He'll know who you are. He gets confused about things sometimes, but he's amazing mentally. Physically, still struggling some. But why did 2 brain bleeds and 2 craniotomies and a liver embolization because his liver was leaking blood didn't cause us to doubt that God was going to restore Earl back to health? And why did someone coming in with oncology embroidered on their coat make me go, oh, wow, that sounds bad? Why? Because I'm just like the disciples. They had watched Jesus do miracles. They'd seen him raise the dead. They just helped him feed 5,000 people from 5 loaves and 2 fishes. It was a miracle. And they get in a boat and he says, go to the other side. And they know that if Jesus says something, he's God, it's going to happen. And they get in the middle of the lake and they have a horrible storm, and these are fishermen. They're not afraid of that lake. And they let doubt win. Why did they let doubt win? Where do we get as people when our circumstances just overwhelm us? And we say, well, maybe this is too big for God. Maybe God's finished now. And maybe he is. I don't know. I know that my life is surrendered to him. And so is Earl's. But we've got to quit talking about there being anything other than life. And we've got to do like my dad used to say when he was sick, you got to live till you die. And so today, we're alive. And everyone in this room at some point will leave this body and go and be the spirit being and fully whole on the other side of the veil. We don't know what day that will be. And the Bible even talks about the last enemy to be defeated is death in our physical bodies. So that's going to happen at some point too. But why do we let doubt win? Why do we not do like Abraham when God says, Leka, get out of what you think is right. Get out of your comfort zone. Get out of your traditions. So what if Steve Jobs died from the exact same thing? So what? Did he believe in Jehovah Rapha, the God who heals? I don't know. But I know Earl does, and I do. So why are we not holding on to that? When we are having to face a storm, sometimes it's easier to have faith for other people's storms. So you have 5,000 people that are hungry. And Jesus says, I'm going to feed them. And you have faith for that because you're not in their boat. But when you're in the boat, and Jesus isn't in the boat with you, and you think, I'm going to die. We all have to get over ourselves and come out of ourselves. And ourself has what the world has: fear, doubt, shame, embarrassment, anger, resentment, frustration, regret, all the things that we struggle with. And he's saying, Leka, get out of yourself and go to a place that I will show you. And that place I'm going to show you is who you really are. I'm going to show you who you really are. And I'm going to walk with you every step of the way. And not only is he God and walks with us every step of the way, he's already there when we get there. So today, want to challenge you. What are you facing in your boat? Jesus wanted them to walk on the waves like he was. He was saying, I have command over this. I'm in control of this. Walking on water is not what people do in the world. That's not a worldly mindset. That's not being conformed to this world and thinking like the world thinks. You're going to have to think like I think, and I can walk on top of that circumstance. And you can too, if you will not fear, and you'll not let doubt win. So, do I know what's going to happen tomorrow? No, and neither do you. But Jesus is already there, and he's saying, I'm going to go with you every step of the journey. As I was with Abraham, I will be with you. And I will make your name great, and I will bless those who bless you, and I'll curse those who curse you, and in you all the nations of the earth will be blessed. That is the promise for all who are calling on the name of the Lord and believe like Abraham. That's what we just read in the Word. He is the father of our faith. And so the promises of Abraham are our promises. But even greater than that, the promises of Jesus Christ are our promises. He is the God of resurrection. He is the God who calls those things that are not as though they were. And we have to start calling in our own lives what isn't as if it is. Whether it's a wayward child, whether it's a bad marriage, whether it's bad finances, whether it's bad choices you've made, you start speaking to it like what God says about it. And quit talking about it like the world talks about it, which I've been doing. So I've repented. I want to give all of us a chance to do that. We've all have those places in our life where we're prophesying gloom and doom. And God says, that's not what I'm saying about it. Why don't you say what I say? So we need to ask him those things. What do we need to say? Do we need to speak health over something? Do we need to speak life over something? Do we need to speak prosperity over something? What do you need to speak over that storm that you're afraid of? And don't let doubt win. And while this song is playing, it's called A Hard-Fought Hallelujah. It's a brand new song by Brandon Lake. Michaela sent it to me yesterday.